I said it to hurt him, to win the argument. I told him his brother felt more like a man. I thought it would just sting in private, but he told his entire family. And at the next family dinner, they didn't just confront me. They turned the night into a public joke, and I was the punchline. The invitation had come exactly 2 weeks after our fight, delivered with the same casual warmth that had always characterized my relationship with the Morrison family. Eleanor, his mother, had called me personally to extend the invitation to their monthly family dinner, her voice as sweet and welcoming as it had been for the past year and a half of dating her son Connor. She mentioned that they were having all the favorites, her famous lasagna, garlic bread that could resurrect the dead, and the tiramisu that had convinced me Connor's family might actually be worth putting up with his moods. Connor met me at the door with a smile that should have been my first warning that something was off. He was being too charming, too attentive, greeting me with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for important work events or his mother's birthday. He complimented my dress, offered to take my coat, and guided me into the house with the solicitous attention of someone who was either genuinely glad to see me or putting on a performance for an audience I couldn't yet identify. The living room was full of Morrisons in various configurations. His parents, his older brother Derek, with his wife and 2 kids, his sister Madison, with her new boyfriend, his grandparents who'd driven in from Phoenix for the occasion. Everyone seemed unusually excited to see me, offering hugs and compliments, and asking about my work with the kind of genuine interest that felt almost too good to be true. Eleanor hugged me tighter and longer than usual, holding onto my shoulders as she looked into my eyes with an expression that I initially read as maternal affection, but later realized was something much more calculating. She told me how lovely I looked, how glad she was that I could make it, how much the family had been looking forward to having me join them for dinner. Her warmth felt genuine in the moment, but there was an undercurrent of something else that I couldn't quite identify. Derek, Connor's older brother, was particularly friendly that evening. He gave me one of his trademark winks as he handed me a glass of wine, asked about my recent promotion at work, and made the kind of easy conversation that had always made him my favorite member of Connor's family. Derek was everything Connor wasn't. Confident without being arrogant, successful without being boastful, charming in ways that felt effortless rather than calculated. That preference for Derek over Connor had been the foundation of the comment that would ultimately destroy my relationship and my standing with the entire family. It wasn't something I'd planned to say, or even something I'd consciously thought about until the words were leaving my mouth. It had just been a weapon I'd reached for in the heat of an argument, designed to wound Connor in the most personal way possible. The argument that had started everything had taken place exactly 2 weeks earlier, in Connor's apartment, after what should have been a romantic dinner that had instead devolved into another discussion about our relationship problems. We'd been having issues for months. Communication breakdowns, mismatched expectations, the kind of fundamental incompatibilities that probably should have ended things much earlier than they did. Connor had been complaining about feeling unappreciated, claiming that I didn't show enough enthusiasm for his career achievements or emotional support for his various professional and personal struggles. He said I seemed distracted during our conversations, that I didn't seem as invested in our future together as he was, that maybe I wasn't ready for the kind of serious relationship he was looking for. The criticism had stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. I had been distracted lately, struggling with my own work stress, and wondering whether Connor and I were actually compatible in the long term. His neediness had been grating on me, his constant requirement for validation and reassurance feeling more like emotional labor than the natural give and take of a healthy relationship. But what had pushed me over the edge was his suggestion that maybe the problem was my inability to appreciate what I had with him, that perhaps I didn't recognize how lucky I was to be with someone who was so committed to making our relationship work. The implication that I should be grateful for his attention, that he was somehow doing me a favor by dating me, had triggered something ugly in my response. That's when I'd said it. the words that would echo through every interaction with his family for months afterward, the sentence that would be turned into entertainment and ammunition, and ultimately the foundation for the most humiliating evening of my adult life. I'd told Connor that, honestly, his brother Derek just felt more like a man than he did. I'd said it because I knew it would hurt him in exactly the way he'd hurt me, with his condescending comments about my gratitude and appreciation. Derek was everything Connor insecured himself about. More successful, more confident, more naturally charismatic. Comparing them was designed to be devastating, and I delivered the comparison with the surgical precision of someone who'd been storing up resentments for months. The effect had been immediate and total. Connor had gone completely silent, his face cycling through shock, hurt, and finally a cold anger that I'd never seen from him before. He'd looked at me for a long moment, processing what I'd just said, and then he'd done something that should have warned me about what was coming. He'd smiled, not a hurt smile or an angry one, but the kind of calculating expression that suggested he'd just received information he planned to use strategically. Then he'd told me that maybe I should leave, that we both needed time to think about whether this relationship was something we actually wanted to continue. I'd left his apartment that night feeling vindicated and powerful, like I'd finally gotten through to him about the dynamic problems in our relationship. I'd assumed he was hurt and embarrassed, that he'd spend the next few days processing what I'd said and hopefully come back ready to have a more honest conversation about our compatibility issues. But Connor hadn't called or texted in the days following our fight. When I'd tried to reach out to him, his responses had been brief and cold, giving me no indication of where we stood or whether he was interested in working through what had happened between us. The silence had been unsettling, but I'd convinced myself that he was just taking time to cool off before we addressed the underlying issues in our relationship. The family dinner invitation had felt like a positive sign, evidence that Connor was ready to move past our argument and integrate me back into his family circle. I'd seen it as an opportunity to smooth things over, to show his family that we were working through our problems, and that I was committed to being part of their extended clan. Walking into their dining room that evening, I'd been struck by how festive everything looked. The table was set with their good china and crystal, candles were lit, and Eleanor had clearly gone to considerable effort to make the evening special. Everyone was dressed nicely, and there was an air of celebration that felt warm and welcoming. But as we took our seats around the large dining table, I started to notice details that felt slightly off. The seating arrangement had been carefully planned in ways that felt deliberate. I was placed directly across from Derek, with Connor beside me, and the rest of the family positioned to have clear views of whatever was about to unfold. The conversation felt slightly too animated, like everyone was performing enthusiasm rather than experiencing it naturally. When Elena brought out the appetizers, I noticed that my placemat was different from everyone else's. While the family members had elegant cloth placemats in burgundy and gold, mine was clearly custom-made, featuring a bright design with text that made my stomach drop with recognition. In bold letters across the top, it read, #, Team Derek, with small heart emojis scattered around the border. The blood drained from my face as I realized what was happening. But before I could process the full implications, Derek stood up with his wine glass, raised for what appeared to be an impromptu toast. His smile was warm and charming, exactly the kind of easy confidence that had always made him my favorite Morrison family member, but now it felt predatory and calculated. Derek's voice carried clearly across the table as he announced that he wanted to make a toast to me, to thank me for my honesty and for recognizing quality when I saw it. He said he was flattered by my good taste and discerning judgment, even if my timing could use some work. The toast concluded with a line that made the entire table erupt in laughter. To Zoe, a woman who knows a real man when she feels one. The laughter that followed was immediate and enthusiastic, the kind of response you'd expect to a perfectly delivered punchline, rather than someone making a toast at a family dinner. I sat there frozen in my chair, my face burning with embarrassment, as I realized that my private comment to Connor had become entertainment for his entire extended family. Connor's father, Robert, joined in with his own commentary about how refreshing it was to meet someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even when her honesty might be inconvenient for certain people at the table. His tone was jovial and teasing, but there was an edge to his words that made it clear this wasn't just good-natured family ribbing. Elena disappeared into the kitchen and returned with the first course, a beautiful antipasto platter that she placed in the center of the table with ceremonial flourish. But it was the small card next to the platter that caught my attention. A handwritten note that read Derek's favorite appetizer in elegant script that matched the wedding invitations I'd seen throughout their house. The dinner continued with course after course of carefully planned humiliation disguised as family hospitality. Each dish came with some reference to Derek's preferences or superiority, delivered with the kind of warm family humor that made it impossible for me to object without looking like I couldn't take a joke. The salad was Derek's garden special, the bread was the man of the house's choice, and the wine selection had been curated according to someone with real taste. By the time Elena brought out the main course, her famous lasagna that had been renamed the real man's meal for the evening, I was starting to understand the full scope of what they had planned for me. This wasn't just casual teasing or good-natured family humor. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to humiliate me for my comment about their family hierarchy, executed with the kind of planning and coordination that suggested they'd been discussing my behavior extensively. Derek played his role perfectly, accepting the compliments and attention with the kind of gracious modesty that made him seem even more attractive and confident. He thanked his family for recognizing his many qualities, made jokes about always knowing he was the superior brother, and generally acted like someone who was enjoying every minute of my public humiliation. Connor, meanwhile, sat beside me in relative silence, occasionally adding comments that seemed supportive but actually added to the overall effect of making me feel isolated and exposed. He'd pat my hand sympathetically while his family made jokes at my expense, creating the impression that he was somehow separate from what was happening, even though he was clearly the one who had orchestrated it. The extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins who'd driven in for the occasion, all seemed to be in on whatever had been planned for the evening. They made references to comments they'd heard, asked pointed questions about my preferences in men, and generally treated my private relationship drama as public entertainment that they were entitled to enjoy. But it was Connor's grandmother who delivered what felt like the most calculated blow of the evening. Rose Morrison was 83 years old and had the kind of sweet maternal presence that made everyone in the family treat her opinions as sacred wisdom. When she looked at me with her kind, watery eyes and said that it was nice to finally meet someone who could appreciate the difference between boys and men, the comment felt like being stabbed with a knife made of sugar. The conversation continued throughout dinner, with family members sharing stories about Derek's various accomplishments and qualities that seemed designed to highlight everything Connor lacked. His business success, his confidence with women, his natural leadership abilities, his general superiority as a human being. All of it delivered with the kind of fond family pride that made my initial comparison seem prophetic rather than cruel. When Eleanor finally brought out dessert, I knew from the expressions around the table that this was going to be the climax of whatever performance they'd planned for the evening. The cake was beautiful, 3 layers of chocolate and vanilla with elegant decorative frosting, but the message written across the top in delicate script made my heart sink with despair. To the real man in the family, the applause that greeted the cake was immediate and sustained, with family members taking photos and making comments about Elena's creativity and attention to detail. Derek stood up to cut the first slice, making jokes about finally getting the recognition he deserved and thanking his family for always knowing which son was the real prize. But the final humiliation was yet to come. As dessert was being served, Elena handed me a small envelope with my name written on it in the same elegant script that had appeared on all the evening's decorations. Inside was a card with my exact quote printed in formal calligraphy, surrounded by decorative borders and small illustrations that made it look like a wedding invitation or formal announcement. The card read, "Honestly, your brother Derek just feels more like a man. Zoe, spoken with love and honesty." Below the quote, in smaller text, was a note. "Sometimes the truth deserves to be celebrated. Thank you for your candid assessment of our family's men. We couldn't agree more. Love, the Morrison family." Elena stood up and asked me to read the card aloud so that everyone could appreciate the beautiful calligraphy work that had gone into creating it. The request was delivered with the kind of warm, maternal insistence that made it impossible to refuse without causing a scene that would make me look even worse than I already did. My hands were shaking as I read my own words back to Connor's family, hearing how cruel and calculated they sounded when spoken in front of the people they were designed to hurt. The silence that followed was deafening, and then the entire table erupted in applause that felt like the kind of response you'd give to a particularly good performance, rather than someone sharing a private moment of relationship conflict. Derek stood up and gave me a mock bow, thanking me for my honesty and for recognizing his many superior qualities. He said it meant a lot to finally have someone in the family who could see him clearly and wasn't afraid to speak the truth about what she observed. The speech was delivered with perfect comedic timing and just enough sincerity to make it seem like genuine gratitude rather than calculated mockery. Robert raised his wine glass for one final toast, announcing that it wasn't often they had a guest who brought such clarity and honesty to their family gatherings. He said they should all be grateful to have someone willing to tell them hard truths about themselves, even when those truths might be uncomfortable for some people to hear. That's when I finally broke. The combination of public humiliation, coordinated family mockery, and the realization that Connor had shared my private comment with his entire extended family was more than I could handle. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to use the restroom, and instead grabbed my coat and purse and headed straight for the front door. No one followed me. No one called my name, or asked if I was okay, or offered any explanation for what had just happened. I could hear laughter continuing from the dining room as I let myself out of their house, the sound of a family enjoying their evening entertainment even after the main attraction had left the building. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage and growing comprehension of how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered by people I'd thought of as warm and welcoming. The Morrison family had turned my moment of private cruelty into a coordinated campaign of public humiliation, and they'd done it with the kind of planning and precision that suggested they'd been discussing my comment for weeks. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Someone had posted photos from the dinner on Instagram, including shots of the custom placemat, the decorated cake, and me reading the card aloud, with my face red with embarrassment. The caption read, "Family dinners just hit different when someone keeps it 100 real," with laughing emojis and tags of various family members who'd been present for the show. The photos spread through our mutual social circles with the speed that only truly embarrassing content can achieve. Within hours, I was getting text messages from friends asking if it was true that I'd said what people were claiming I'd said about Connor's brother. The story grew and evolved with each retelling, becoming more salacious and dramatic until it barely resembled the original comment. My best friend Sarah called me in a panic after seeing the Instagram posts, demanding to know what had actually happened at the dinner and whether I was okay. Trying to explain the situation to her made me realize how completely I'd been set up. There was no way to describe what had happened without sounding like either a victim of elaborate family bullying or someone who'd deserved exactly what she'd gotten. The professional consequences started almost immediately. I worked in marketing for a small firm where personal reputation mattered, and having photos circulating of me being publicly humiliated at a family dinner didn't exactly scream professional competence. My boss didn't say anything directly, but I could feel the shift in how colleagues treated me, the way conversation stopped when I walked into rooms. Connor, meanwhile, had apparently decided that our relationship was over without bothering to inform me officially. He blocked my number, unfriended me on all social media platforms, and generally treated me like someone who'd never existed in his life. The few mutual friends who still spoke to me said he was acting like the victim in the situation, claiming that I'd publicly humiliated his family by making inappropriate comments about his brother. Derek, who'd been so charming and gracious during the dinner performance, also cut off all contact. He unfollowed me on social media and began posting photos with a new girlfriend within days of the family dinner, as if to emphasize how completely I'd been erased from the Morrison family narrative. The woman looked exactly like the kind of person Derek would date: beautiful, successful, and presumably more tactful than someone who'd make cruel comparisons between brothers. My attempts to apologize or explain myself fell on deaf ears. Elena never responded to my calls or messages. Robert ignored my attempts to reach out, and even the extended family members, who'd seemed friendly during previous gatherings, treated me like I'd never existed. I'd been systematically excised from their family circle, with the efficiency of people who'd done this kind of thing before. The dating scene became impossible to navigate with this story following me around. Men who'd heard various versions of what had happened approached me with assumptions about my character that made genuine connection impossible. Some seemed to think my willingness to make cruel comparisons meant I was available for casual arrangements without emotional investment. Others were fascinated by the drama and wanted to hear all the details about what had happened with the Morrison family. The memes started appearing about 2 weeks after the dinner, created by people who'd seen the photos and decided my humiliation was worth immortalizing in internet culture. My face reading the card became a template for jokes about awkward family situations, with captions like, "When you realize you've been played," and "Family dinner gone wrong." The images spread far beyond our local social circles, becoming entertainment for strangers who didn't know or care about the real people involved. I'd wanted to wound Connor's pride by comparing him unfavorably to his brother, thinking I was delivering a private insult that would make him understand how his behavior had affected me. Instead, I'd handed his entire family the perfect setup for a coordinated campaign of public humiliation that would follow me for months and probably years. Some lessons cost more than you ever expect to pay, and some private moments of cruelty become public entertainment in ways you never imagined possible. I said Derek felt more like a man than Connor, thinking I was winning an argument with a devastating personal attack. Instead, I became the punchline to a carefully orchestrated family joke that they served with dinner and a side of perfectly timed revenge. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation itself. It was the realization that Connor's family had turned my moment of ugliness into entertainment, treating my cruelty as something worth celebrating and memorializing rather than something to be addressed privately between adults. They'd made sure I felt like less than a woman by serving my own words back to me with a plate, a cake, and a perfectly timed punchline I'd never lived down.